October 7, 1944. The tree-lined approach to Overloon, Netherlands. Unteroffizier Karl Becker crouched in his Panther Ausführung G's turret, scanning the flat Dutch countryside through his commander's periscope. His crew had been briefed that morning about American armor advancing from the south. Shermans, his company commander had said with barely concealed contempt, the same medium tanks they had been destroying with impunity since Normandy. Becker's gunner, Ernst Hoffman, had fired 17 shots at American tanks over the past 3 months. 14 had resulted in catastrophic kills. The other 3 had been mobility kills that left burning hulks in French wheat fields. Not once had an American shell penetrated their 80mm sloped glacis plate. Not once had Hoffman felt anything approaching fear when engaging the stubby-gunned Shermans that seemed to multiply like rabbits no matter how many his company destroyed. The morning fog was lifting when Hoffman spotted movement at approximately 900 meters. 3 Shermans, advancing in a loose wedge formation across an open field. But something was different. The lead tank's turret profile looked wrong. The gun tube extended farther than the stumpy 75mm guns they had grown accustomed to seeing. Becker raised his binoculars. The barrel was longer, thinner, more purposeful looking. He felt the first flutter of uncertainty. His training officer had mentioned rumors of improved American tanks, but the briefing had been vague, dismissive. Surely these were still just Shermans. Hoffman traversed the turret, acquiring the lead American tank in his sight. At this range, with their 7.5cm KIUK 42 gun, they could destroy any Sherman with a single well-placed shot. Becker gave the fire command. The Panther rocked back on its suspension as the gun fired. Through his periscope, Becker watched the tracer arc across the field and strike the Sherman's hull. But instead of the expected explosion, the American tank kept moving. The shell had ricocheted off the frontal armor at an angle, unusual but not unprecedented. Hoffman fired again. This time the round struck squarely. The Sherman shuddered but continued advancing. Then the American tank fired back. The report was sharp, different from the duller boom of 75mm guns Becker had heard so many times before. The round screamed past the Panther's turret, close enough that Becker instinctively ducked. Another American shell followed within seconds. Then another. The Shermans were firing rapidly, aggressively, without the hesitation German crews had come to expect from American tankers who knew they were outgunned. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. A 4th round struck the Panther's gun mantlet with a sound like a massive hammer on an anvil. Becker felt the entire turret shudder. Metal fragments ricocheted inside the fighting compartment. Hoffman screamed. When Becker looked down, he saw his gunner clutching his face, blood streaming between his fingers. The round had penetrated, not deeply, but enough to send spalling fragments through the turret interior. The loader was slumped against the turret wall, unconscious or dead. Becker couldn't tell which. The driver needed no orders. The Panther's engine roared as the tank reversed at maximum speed, disappearing into the tree line, while the remaining Shermans continued their advance. As they retreated, Becker's mind struggled to process what had just happened. An American medium tank had penetrated a Panther's frontal armor. The impossible had become real. Everything German tank crews had been taught about American technical inferiority was being rewritten by tungsten and velocity. What Karl Becker didn't know, what none of the German tank crews facing American armor, in autumn 1944 fully understood yet, was that the balance of armored warfare had fundamentally shifted. The weapon system that would make this shift possible had been in development for years, delayed by bureaucratic hesitation, underestimated by commanders who believed the 75mm gun would suffice, and finally deployed in numbers just sufficient to transform the tactical calculus of tank combat. The story of how the 76mm gun and its specialized ammunition changed. American tank warfare begins not with combat, but with recognition of failure. By late 1943, American ordnance officers analyzing intelligence from the Eastern Front and North Africa understood that German tank development was accelerating beyond what American planners had anticipated. The Panther, Germany's response to the Soviet 34 combined thick sloped armor with a powerful high-velocity gun in a medium tank chassis. This combination threatened to render the M4 Sherman obsolete before the invasion of Europe even began. The Sherman had been designed in 1941 to defeat the German tanks then in service, the Panzer III and early Panzer IV models. Against these targets, the Sherman's 75mm M3 gun proved entirely adequate. The gun could penetrate 59mm of vertical armor at 1,000 meters, using standard M61 armor-piercing capped ammunition. This was sufficient to defeat any German tank's frontal armor when the Sherman entered production. But tank warfare doesn't stand still. German designers, spurred by encounters with heavily armored Soviet tanks, dramatically increased armor protection on new designs. The Panther's glacis plate used 80mm of steel sloped at 55 degrees from vertical, creating an effective thickness of approximately 140mm. Against this armor, the Sherman's 75mm gun was effectively useless at normal combat ranges. American ordnance officers recognized this problem by early 1943. The solution seemed straightforward. Mount a more powerful gun on the Sherman chassis. The 76mm Monet gun, developed as an anti-aircraft weapon and adapted for tank use, offered significantly improved armor penetration. Using standard M62 armor-piercing capped ammunition, the 76mm gun could penetrate 109mm of armor at 1,000 meters at 0 degrees obliquity. This represented an 85% improvement over the 75mm gun. On paper, the upgrade seemed to solve the Panther problem. Reality proved more complicated. The development of the 76mm Sherman involved more than simply mounting a larger gun. The increased recoil forces required modifications to the turret design. Engineers at the Detroit Arsenal, working under intense time pressure, designed a new turret with a larger turret ring to accommodate the longer gun and its recoil mechanism. The first production vehicles, designated M4A176W, began rolling off assembly lines in January 1944. These tanks incorporated numerous improvements beyond the new gun: better suspension, wider tracks, improved armor on the hull front. American industry had produced what appeared to be a Sherman capable of fighting German heavy tanks on more equal terms. But between production and deployment lay a gap filled with bureaucratic caution and tactical misunderstanding. The improved Shermans arrived in Britain in April 1944. 130 tanks, enough to equip several battalions, sat in depots while commanders debated their deployment. General George Patton, soon to command the Third Army in France, inspected the new tanks personally. His reaction was surprisingly negative. Patton believed the 75mm gun's high explosive capability was more valuable for supporting infantry than the improved anti-tank performance of the 76mm. His concern reflected the Sherman's dual role in American doctrine, not purely a tank destroyer, but a multi-purpose vehicle supporting infantry advances and engaging enemy armor when necessary. Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, commanding Army Ground Forces, shared similar reservations. Training American crews on a new weapon system required time that pre-invasion schedules didn't permit. Logistics officers worried about maintaining two different ammunition types in the complex supply network that would support operations in France. Most critically, intelligence estimates suggested the 75mm gun would prove adequate against expected German opposition. These estimates were catastrophically wrong, based on outdated information about German tank production and deployment. By June 1944, 38% of German tanks in Western Europe were Panthers, not the handful intelligence had predicted. The result of this caution was that not a single 76mm Sherman participated in the D-Day landings on June 6, 1944. American tank battalions went ashore equipped with the standard 75mm Shermans, trusting that American numerical superiority, air power, and artillery support would compensate for any technical disadvantage against German armor. For the first weeks of the Normandy campaign, this calculation seemed reasonable. German tank deployments were limited by Allied air superiority and the complicated bocage terrain of French hedgerows. When tank versus tank engagements did occur, American forces typically enjoyed numerical advantages and could coordinate combined arms support effectively. But reports from frontline units painted an increasingly troubling picture. Platoon leaders described engagements where their shells bounced harmlessly off German tank armor while return fire destroyed Shermans with single shots. Company commanders reported that crews were becoming reluctant to engage Panthers directly, calling for artillery or air support instead. Battalion after-action reports documented mounting tank losses to German armor that American guns couldn't reliably penetrate. By early July, the cumulative weight of these reports reached command level with sufficient urgency that previous caution evaporated. On July 2, 1944, complaints about the 75mm gun's inadequacy reached General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander. His response, witnessed and documented by multiple officers present, captured command-level frustration with mounting casualties and inadequate equipment. "You mean our 76 won't knock these Panthers out?" Eisenhower demanded. "Why? I thought it was going to be the wonder gun of the war." His anger focused on ordnance officers who had assured him the 76mm gun would handle any German tank. The disconnect between ordnance assurances and battlefield reality had cost American tank crews their lives. A board convened on July 12 to officially determine what frontline crews already knew from bitter experience. Standard American tank guns could not reliably defeat Panther frontal armor at normal combat ranges. The 75mm gun was completely inadequate. Even the 76mm gun, using standard M62 ammunition, struggled against the Panther's sloped glacis plate. General Omar Bradley, commanding the First Army, immediately ordered 76mm Shermans rushed from British depots to frontline units. The first improved tanks reached combat units on July 20th. 5 days later, during Operation Cobra, the American breakout from the Normandy beachhead, 102 M4A 176 tanks made their combat debut. The engagement reports from these first 76mm Sherman actions were mixed. Against Panzer IVs and German assault guns, the new gun proved devastatingly effective. Crews reported consistent penetrations at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. Against Panthers, results were less encouraging. The sloped frontal armor remained highly resistant to the M62 ammunition. Crews quickly learned they needed flanking shots against side armor or extremely close-range shots against the gun mantlet, neither option being tactically desirable when facing a tank whose powerful gun could destroy a Sherman from 2,000 meters away. Lieutenant James Bates of the 2nd Armored Division recorded his first engagement with a Panther using the 76mm gun in his after-action report dated August 3, 1944. His platoon encountered 2 Panthers in a small French village south of Virey. At 700 meters, Bates ordered his gunner to engage the lead Panther. The first round struck the glacis plate and ricocheted skyward. The second round hit in nearly the same location with identical results. The third round, aimed at the gun mantlet, struck a glancing blow that merely scarred the curved armor. By this time, the German tanks had identified Bates's position and returned fire. One Sherman in his platoon was destroyed, another was disabled. Bates ordered his remaining tanks to withdraw while calling for artillery support. "We were told the 76 would handle Panthers," Bates wrote in his report. "At normal combat ranges, it does not. The armor is too thick and too well sloped. We need either much closer range, perfect shot placement, or different ammunition. As it stands, engaging Panthers frontally remains extremely hazardous even with our improved gun." This assessment, multiplied across dozens of similar engagements throughout late July and August 1944, created a crisis of confidence among American tank crews. The improved gun they had been promised as a Panther killer proved only marginally better than the weapon it replaced. The solution existed, but production and deployment lagged desperately behind tactical needs. American ordnance engineers had been developing specialized armor-piercing ammunition since spring 1942. The concept was elegantly simple in theory but challenging in execution. Standard armor-piercing ammunition used a solid steel penetrator. Its effectiveness depended on the steel's hardness and the projectile's kinetic energy at impact. Increasing penetration required either harder steel, which risked the penetrator shattering on impact, or higher velocity, which required a more powerful gun and created additional barrel wear. The alternative approach used a sub-caliber penetrator made from an extremely dense, hard material surrounded by a lighter carrier that fell away after the projectile left the barrel. This design concentrated kinetic energy into a smaller, denser core while reducing the projectile's overall weight. Lower weight meant higher velocity from the same propellant charge. Higher velocity combined with extreme density created dramatically improved penetration. The material chosen for this penetrator core was tungsten carbide, one of the hardest materials available, with a density of 15.63 grams per cubic centimeter, nearly twice that of steel. The development of what would become the T4 high-velocity armor-piercing round, later standardized as the M93 HVAP, required solving numerous engineering challenges. The tungsten carbide core needed precise manufacturing to avoid internal flaws that would cause shattering on impact. The aluminum carrier body needed careful design to ensure the projectile remained stable in flight after the sabot separated. The propellant charge needed adjustment to achieve maximum velocity without creating excessive barrel wear. Testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground throughout 1943 demonstrated that these challenges could be overcome. By January 1944, the T4 round was ready for production, but production at scale requires more than finalized designs. It requires raw materials, manufacturing capacity, and prioritization within a wartime economy juggling countless competing demands. Tungsten carbide production depended on tungsten ore, a strategic material imported primarily from China. Before the war, China had supplied 36% of global tungsten production, but wartime disruption of shipping and competing demands from multiple industries severely limited tungsten availability for ammunition production. Each 76mm HVAP round contained approximately 0.88 kilograms of tungsten carbide. A single Sherman tank carrying just 6 rounds required nearly 5 kilograms of this scarce material. The competing demands for tungsten were substantial and urgent. Machine tool manufacturers needed tungsten carbide for cutting tools that machined components for aircraft engines, artillery pieces, and countless other weapons. The Navy required tungsten for armor-piercing shells for naval guns. The Army Air Forces needed tungsten for various applications in aircraft manufacturing. Tank destroyer units equipped with 3-inch and 90mm guns had priority for HVAP ammunition due to their specialized anti-tank mission. Medium tank battalions, whose Shermans served dual roles supporting infantry and engaging armor, received lower priority. The result was that HVAP production in summer and fall 1944 remained frustratingly limited. In July, ordnance factories produced approximately 1,000 rounds of 76mm HVAP. August yielded another 1,000 rounds. September production reached 1,700 rounds. Not until November did monthly production achieve 5,000 rounds, rising to 7,000 rounds monthly by January 1945. By March 1945, cumulative production had reached approximately 33,000 rounds. This sounds substantial until compared against the number of 76mm Shermans deployed in Europe and the frequency of engagements with German heavy armor. By February 1945, the average 76mm Sherman in Europe had received a total allocation of 5 HVAP rounds. 5 rounds to face an enemy deploying Panthers as the standard medium tank in panzer divisions. A Sherman company with 17 tanks would possess 85 HVAP rounds total, while potentially facing German units fielding 30 or more Panthers. Tank commanders faced agonizing decisions about when to expend their limited HVAP ammunition. Fire too early and waste scarce rounds on targets that standard ammunition could defeat. Wait too long and be destroyed before employing the one ammunition type that could save the crew. The first HVAP rounds reached frontline units in August 1944, but their arrival was overshadowed by broader tactical problems. The Normandy hedgerows had forced American armor into close-quarters combat, where superior German guns could ambush Sherman columns from concealed positions. German defensive doctrine positioned Panthers in hull-down positions, where only the heavily armoured turret remained exposed while the more vulnerable hull was hidden behind terrain. From these prepared positions, Panther crews could engage advancing Shermans at ranges where American return fire was ineffective. The psychological impact on American tank crews during this period was severe and measurable. Veterans later described the visceral fear of encountering Panthers, knowing their shells would likely bounce off while German return fire could penetrate Sherman armour at extreme ranges. Some crews nicknamed the Sherman the Ronson lighter, claiming it caught fire every time. While post-war analysis showed this reputation was exaggerated, the perception was real and affected behaviour. Tank commanders who spotted Panthers often chose to call for artillery or air support rather than engage directly, ceding tactical initiative to an enemy who might be defeated with proper ammunition and tactics. The transformation of this psychological dynamic began not in the hedgerows of Normandy, but in the more open terrain of eastern France, where American armoured divisions exploited the breakout and raced toward the German border. It was here, in engagements where American crews finally possessed both improved guns and improved ammunition in sufficient quantity to make tactical difference, that the balance of armoured warfare began shifting. German Panther crews, who had fought with confidence born from technical superiority and months of successful engagements, were about to discover that American industrial capacity could produce solutions to tactical problems faster than German industry could counter them. Sergeant William Chen of the 4th Armoured Division recorded his first experience firing HVAP ammunition in his personal diary on September 14, 1944. His company had received 6 HVAP rounds per tank, with strict instructions to use them only against heavy German armour at ranges under 1,000 metres. The rounds looked different, Chen wrote. Lighter colour, different balance. Our lieutenant briefed us that these special rounds could penetrate Panther mantlets if we hit them right. We'd heard promises before about weapons that would level the playing field. Most proved disappointing. But there was something in the lieutenant's voice, a confidence we hadn't heard when discussing tactics against Panthers. Chen's first opportunity to employ HVAP came 3 days later during an engagement near the Moselle River. His platoon encountered 2 Panthers at approximately 800 metres, positioned to cover a bridge crossing. Standard doctrine would have called for artillery support or manoeuvring for flank shots, but Chen's platoon leader decided to test the new ammunition. Chen's gunner, Corporal Thomas Ritchie, acquired the lead Panther in his sight. The range was well within the effective envelope briefed for HVAP. Ritchie fired. The round crossed the distance in under a second and struck the Panther's gun mantlet with a sharp crack distinctly different from the dull thud of ricochets they had grown accustomed to. Through his periscope, Chen watched smoke begin pouring from the Panther's turret hatches. The German crew bailed out within seconds, abandoning their tank as internal fires spread. The second Panther immediately reversed, retreating rather than engaging American tanks that had just demonstrated they could penetrate frontal armour. We sat in silence for maybe 10 seconds, Chen wrote. Then Ritchie started laughing. Not funny laughing, but almost hysterical laughing. The relief of finally having a weapon that worked against those damn tanks. We'd been fighting blind against Panthers for months, and suddenly we could hit back. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. This pattern repeated across multiple American armoured units throughout September and October 1944. Crews with access to HVAP ammunition discovered they could engage Panthers with reasonable probability of achieving penetration under favourable circumstances. The key phrase was favourable circumstances. HVAP was not a miracle solution that made Shermans equal to Panthers across all engagement scenarios. The ammunition had specific limitations that crews learned through combat experience, sometimes tragically. The tungsten carbide core, while excellent at penetrating armour when conditions were optimal, was inherently brittle. Below certain impact velocities, approximately 700 meters per second, the core could shatter on contact rather than penetrating. This meant HVAP effectiveness declined significantly at longer ranges where velocity had decreased due to air resistance. The effective range against Panther mantlets was approximately 1,000 meters. Beyond this distance, the probability of the core shattering on impact increased substantially, wasting scarce ammunition and often provoking return fire from German guns that remained effective at much longer ranges. The angle of impact mattered enormously. Against the Panther's gun mantlet, with its curved 100mm thick cast steel surface, HVAP proved highly effective at ranges up to 1,000 meters when hits were achieved. Against the glacis plate, with its extreme 55-degree slope, results were poor except at very close ranges and favorable angles. The tungsten carbide rounds traveling at high velocity often ricocheted or shattered when striking heavily sloped armor. This meant that even with HVAP, Sherman crews still needed to maneuver for advantageous shot angles, flanking Panthers when tactically possible or targeting the mantlet rather than attempting glacis penetrations. Training on proper HVAP employment was often minimal, as the ammunition arrived at frontline units faster than training materials could be developed and distributed. Many crews learned effective employment techniques through trial and error under combat conditions. Lieutenant Marcus Webb's experience on October 23, 1944, illustrated the learning curve. His Sherman engaged a Panther at approximately 1,200 meters, beyond the effective range for HVAP, but within the range where a hit might achieve penetration if conditions were perfect. Webb's gunner fired 3 HVAP rounds. All 3 struck the Panther's frontal armor. None penetrated. The tungsten cores, having lost too much velocity over the extended range, shattered on impact. The Panther returned fire, destroying 1 Sherman in Webb's platoon before the American tanks withdrew to more favorable positions. Webb's after-action report noted bitterly, "We wasted 3 irreplaceable rounds because we didn't understand the ammunition's limitations." The briefing said effective to 1,000 meters. We interpreted that as, "will work at 1,000 meters." What it actually meant was, might work under perfect conditions at 1,000 meters, but probability drops rapidly beyond 800 meters. That distinction cost us a tank and 3 dead crew members. This harsh education process, repeated across numerous units, gradually created a body of tactical knowledge about optimal HVAP employment. Experienced crews learned to hold fire until range closed to 800 meters or less. They learned to target the mantlet rather than the glacis plate. They learned to coordinate with other tanks, using standard ammunition to suppress German crews with near misses while maneuvering for optimal HVAP shots. They learned that HVAP gave them capability to fight Panthers on more competitive terms, but success still required skill, judgment, and favorable circumstances. The German perspective on HVAP ammunition, gathered from post-war interrogations and examination of wartime documents, revealed a mixture of professional recognition and deep frustration. German ordnance officers understood that American industry had solved the tungsten core ammunition problem more successfully than German manufacturers. Germany had pioneered similar technology with the Panzer Granit 40 series, which used tungsten cores to improve penetration. But production limitations meant these rounds were never available in sufficient quantities to meaningfully affect tactical situations. Hauptmann Fritz Langanke, who commanded a Panther company in the 11th Panzer Division, was captured in December 1944 after his tank was disabled by American fire. During interrogation, he spoke candidly about the psychological impact of facing Shermans equipped with improved ammunition. "In Normandy, we felt superior. Our armor was thicker, our gun more powerful. We could engage American tanks at ranges where they could not harm us. This created confidence, even arrogance. By October, that confidence was gone. We knew the Americans had developed ammunition that could penetrate our mantlets. This knowledge changed everything." Langanke described how awareness of Sherman capability forced more cautious German tactics. We could no longer simply rely on frontal armor for protection. Every engagement required careful positioning to minimize exposure of vulnerable points. Defensive warfare, always. Never the aggressive advances we had trained for. This defensive mindset, born partly from ammunition inferiority, ceded initiative to American forces, who could employ combined arms tactics that negated our advantages. His assessment highlighted a crucial point. The impact of HVAP extended beyond its actual use. The mere knowledge that American tanks possessed ammunition capable of frontal penetration influenced German tactical decisions and psychological state. The most significant test of HVAP effectiveness, and the engagement that would demonstrate its psychological impact most clearly, occurred in September 1944 in eastern France. The Battle of Aracourt, fought over 11 days from September 18th to 29th, would become the largest tank engagement fought by American forces in the European theatre until the Battle of the Bulge. More importantly, it would prove conclusively that American armor doctrine, emphasizing combined arms coordination, superior logistics, and overwhelming material support, could defeat German tactical methods relying on superior individual tank performance. The strategic situation in mid-September 1944 found Lieutenant General George Patton's Third Army, deep in France, advancing rapidly toward the German border with logistics stretched to breaking point. The 4th Armored Division, one of the most effective American armored formations, had seized a bridgehead over the Moselle River near Aracourt. German High Command recognized the threat immediately. If Patton's armor reached the Rhine and crossed into Germany proper, the industrial heart of the Reich would be exposed. General Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army received orders to counterattack, destroy the American bridgehead, and push back Patton's advance. The German force assembled for this attack included 2 newly formed panzer brigades, the 111th and 113th, equipped primarily with Panther tanks fresh from German factories. On paper, the German advantage appeared overwhelming. The 2 brigades together fielded approximately 150 tanks against Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division, which possessed roughly 50 Sherman tanks. The 113th Panzer Brigade alone entered battle with approximately 90 tanks and assault guns, including 42 Panthers and 40 Panzer IVs. German planners anticipated rapid victory. The Panthers' technical superiority should compensate for any American advantages in logistics or air support. This assumption proved catastrophically wrong. The morning of September 19th began with thick fog blanketing the rolling terrain around Aracourt. Visibility dropped to less than 50 meters in some areas, creating conditions that would prove decisive for the coming engagement. German reconnaissance was severely limited. The panzer brigades, lacking proper scouting units due to hurried organization and deployment, advanced blindly into terrain held by American forces who knew the ground intimately and had established defensive positions overnight. At approximately 8 o'clock in the morning, elements of the 113th Panzer Brigade penetrated American outposts east and south of Aracourt. The German tanks, factory new Panthers crewed by soldiers with minimal training, moved forward in column formation. This represented a fundamental tactical error that veteran American tankers immediately recognized and exploited. Column formation, while efficient for road marches, exposed tanks to devastating flank fire and prevented mutual support between vehicles. Experienced commanders would have deployed in line abreast or echelon formations, allowing multiple tanks to engage threats simultaneously. But the Panzer Brigade commanders, recently promoted from staff positions with limited tactical experience, defaulted to training manual formations unsuited to combat against a prepared enemy. Captain Kenneth Lamison's C Company, 37th Tank Battalion, held defensive positions along key approaches to Aracourt. His Sherman crews, all veterans of the fighting across France, had been briefed extensively on their HVAP ammunition, 6 rounds per tank. Use them wisely against Panther turrets or mantlets at ranges where velocity remained sufficient for penetration. Don't waste them on shots beyond 800 meters. Don't attempt glacis penetrations except at point-blank range. Target the mantlet, the turret face, or maneuver for side shots. The fog that hindered German reconnaissance now worked decisively in favor of American defenders. Lieutenant James Ferrese's platoon occupied positions south of the village when the 1st Panther materialized from the mist at barely 75 meters. At this range, the Panther's superior long-range gunnery meant nothing. The German crew had perhaps 3 seconds to identify the threat, traverse the turret, and fire before American guns engaged. They didn't get 3 seconds. Ferrese's gunner, Sergeant Anthony DeFranco, fired instantly without waiting for orders. The HVAP round, travelling at over 1,000 meters per second, struck the Panther's gun mantlet dead center. The tungsten carbide core punched through the 100mm curved cast steel and penetrated into the turret interior. The round detonated, ammunition stored directly beneath the gun breech. The Panther exploded with shocking violence, its turret lifting several inches from the hull ring before settling back as flames erupted from every hatch. 2 more Panthers emerged from the fog within seconds, following the destroyed tank in column. Both German crews were scanning for threats, but hadn't yet identified the American positions. DeFranco traversed left and fired again. The second Panther was struck in the turret face at the junction with the gun mantlet. Penetration was immediate. The crew bailed out as smoke began filling the fighting compartment. Staff Sergeant Robert Early, commanding the Sherman to Ferase's right, engaged the third Panther. His gunner's shot struck low on the mantlet but achieved penetration. The German tank shuddered to a halt, its crew abandoning the vehicle within seconds. 3 Panthers destroyed in less than 30 seconds. The remaining German tanks in the column, unable to see the source of fire through the fog, turned away and retreated. The crews were shocked by the sudden loss of 3 vehicles. To what they had been briefed were inferior American tanks. Throughout the morning of September 19th, similar engagements erupted across the Aracourt sector. American tanks, using the fog as concealment, engaged Panthers at ranges where HVAP rounds were most effective. The close range, limited visibility conditions negated every advantage the Panther possessed. Superior long-range gunnery was useless when visibility was measured in meters. Thick frontal armor mattered less when American tanks fired from flanking positions or targeted vulnerable mantlets at point-blank range. Near Aracourt, a platoon of M18 Hellcat tank destroyers, also equipped with 76mm guns and HVAP ammunition, demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of the new rounds in the hands of experienced crews. The Hellcats, with their open-topped turrets and light armor, were designed for speed and firepower rather than protection. Their doctrine emphasized shoot and scoot tactics, engaging from ambush positions and relocating before enemy return fire arrived. Against Panthers advancing blindly through fog, the Hellcats were lethal. Staff Sergeant Henry Hartmann's Hellcat occupied a position overlooking a road junction when 4 Panthers approached in line. The German tanks were moving cautiously, commanders scanning for threats but unable to see more than 50 meters in any direction. Hartmann waited until the lead Panther was at 300 meters, well within optimal HVAP range. His gunner fired and achieved a clean mantlet penetration. The Panther immediately caught fire. The second German tank, alerted by the explosion ahead, began traversing its turret but couldn't identify the threat source. Hartmann's second shot struck the turret side at the ammunition storage location. The resulting explosion was catastrophic. The remaining 2 Panthers retreated at maximum speed, crews unwilling to advance into what had become a killing zone. Hartmann's Hellcat relocated immediately, following doctrine. Within 5 minutes, his crew was in a new position covering a different approach. Throughout the morning, this pattern repeated. American tank destroyers and Sherman tanks engaged German armor from concealed positions, achieved rapid kills using HVAP ammunition, and relocated before German forces could coordinate effective responses. By noon on September 19th, as the fog finally lifted, American forward artillery observers could coordinate fire with defending tank companies. The weather cleared enough for air support to arrive. P-47. Thunderbolt fighter bombers of the 405th Fighter Group appeared overhead, diving through gaps in the clouds to strike German armor with rockets, bombs, and machine gun fire. The combination of American advantages became devastatingly clear. While the Panther possessed superior armor and firepower as an individual weapon system, American forces employed combined arms tactics as standard doctrine that integrated armor, artillery, air power, infantry, and tank destroyers into a coordinated system. German tanks advanced without adequate artillery support due to ammunition shortages and transportation difficulties. They operated without air cover because the Luftwaffe had been driven from French skies by overwhelming Allied air superiority. They lacked infantry support to clear American defensive positions because the panzer brigades had been organized hastily with insufficient motorized infantry. When Panthers encountered American combined arms defenses, they were destroyed piecemeal, despite their superior individual capabilities. Captain William Dwight of the 8th Tank Battalion recorded his observations of the September 19th fighting in his after-action report. The Germans advanced aggressively, but without proper reconnaissance or combined arms support. Their Panthers are formidable weapons when properly employed, but proper employment requires supporting elements these hastily formed brigades lacked. When a Panther encounters one of our Shermans in isolation, the German tank has significant advantages. When a Panther encounters our integrated defense with tanks, tank destroyers, artillery, and air support working together, those advantages evaporate. The HVAP ammunition proved highly effective against mantlets and turret faces at ranges under 800 meters. We achieved penetration on approximately 70% of mantlet hits at those ranges. The German perspective on September 19th was one of confusion and mounting panic. Oberleutnant Werner Schutz commanded a Panther platoon in the 113th Panzer Brigade. His after-action report, captured when German headquarters was overrun, revealed the psychological impact of the engagement. We were told American tanks could not penetrate our frontal armor. We were told our superior guns would allow us to destroy Sherman formations before they could close to effective range. Neither proved true. American tanks engaged us from concealed positions at close range. Their shells penetrated our mantlets and turrets. Within the first hour, my platoon lost 3 of 5 tanks. The crews who survived spoke of American rounds that struck with tremendous force, different from the shells we had encountered previously. Schutz's report continued with a candid admission of psychological collapse. By mid-morning, my remaining crews were refusing to advance. They had watched comrades die in tanks we believed were invulnerable. The confidence we felt when deploying from Germany had evaporated completely. We were reduced to defensive positions, waiting for American attacks we knew we could not stop. This psychological disintegration, repeated across multiple German units throughout September 19th, proved as decisive as the actual tank losses. Crews that had advanced confidently that morning were now paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. The fighting continued through September 22nd, when the major German offensive efforts finally stalled completely. American forces had destroyed or disabled approximately 86 German tanks and assault guns during the 4-day battle. American losses stood at 25 Sherman tanks and 7 tank destroyers. The kill ratio, approximately 3.4 to 1 in favor of American forces, heavily contradicted the technical superiority German tanks possessed on paper. More significantly, the Panzer brigades had been rendered combat ineffective. Units that had entered battle with 90 or more tanks could barely muster 20 operational vehicles by September 29th. The Battle of Aracourt demonstrated conclusively that ammunition technology, when combined with superior tactics and combined arms coordination, could overcome significant technical disadvantages in individual weapons platforms. The HVAP ammunition had not made Sherman tanks equal to Panthers in armor protection or gun performance, but it had given American crews a tool that allowed them to achieve penetrations under favorable circumstances, eliminating the psychological paralysis that had affected some units during the Normandy fighting. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion at Aracourt with distinction, would later reflect on the engagement's lessons. Abrams, who would rise to become United States Army Chief of Staff and give his name to the Monet Abrams main battle tank, understood that Aracourt proved the superiority of integrated systems over superior individual weapons. The Germans had better tanks, Abrams noted in post-war interviews, but we had better doctrine, better logistics, better air support, better artillery coordination, and ammunition that let us fight their tanks on competitive terms. That combination proved decisive. The German High Command's response to Aracourt revealed deep concern about American ammunition capabilities. Intelligence officers examining destroyed Panthers found evidence of penetrations that standard American ammunition should not have achieved. Smaller entry holes suggested sub-caliber projectiles. Examination of unexploded rounds recovered near disabled tanks confirmed the use of tungsten carbide core ammunition. This discovery had profound strategic implications that extended far beyond immediate tactical considerations. Germany had developed similar ammunition technology with the Panzergranate 40 series, but German tungsten supplies were critically limited by late 1944. Swedish imports, Germany's primary tungsten source, had declined sharply as the war turned against the Reich. Domestic German production remained minimal. Available tungsten was prioritized for machine tools needed in aircraft engine production rather than ammunition. If Americans could field specialized tungsten core ammunition in quantities sufficient to distribute to frontline tank units, it demonstrated industrial capacity and resource access that Germany could not match. Major Hans-Joachim Jung, assigned to evaluate the Arracourt defeat for the German Army High Command, submitted a report in October 1944 that captured German strategic concerns. The Americans possess not only numerical superiority, but also the industrial capacity to develop and produce specialized ammunition that partially negates our armor advantages. We designed the Panther specifically to be invulnerable frontally to American tank guns. Within months, they have developed ammunition that can defeat our protection at combat ranges. This demonstrates a capacity for rapid technological response that we cannot match given our limited resources and disrupted industrial base. Jung's report continued with a prophetic assessment. If American industry can solve the armor penetration problem through ammunition development, they will continue developing improved ammunition faster than we can increase armor protection. We are locked in a technological race we cannot win because they possess superior industrial capacity and resource access. The mathematical implications are dire. Even if we build superior individual tanks, they can produce adequate tanks in overwhelming numbers, equipped with ammunition sufficient to defeat our vehicles under favorable conditions. This combination of quantity and adequate quality will prove strategically decisive. The psychological impact on German tank crews extended far beyond units directly engaged at Arracourt. News of the defeat spread rapidly through the German armored force. Panther crews across the Western Front learned that American Shermans now possessed ammunition capable of frontal penetration. This knowledge fundamentally altered tactical calculations and crew psychology. The sense of invulnerability that thick armor provided was crucial to crew morale and aggressive tactics. When that sense eroded, crew performance suffered measurably. Feldwebel Otto Strauss, a Panther commander in the 2nd Panzer Division who had not participated in Arracourt, recorded in his diary on October 7, 1944, the impact of learning about American ammunition improvements. We received briefings today about new American ammunition capable of penetrating our mantlets. The briefing officer attempted to minimize the threat, stating that the ammunition is rare and only effective at close range. But the message we received was clear. Our armor is no longer invulnerable. This changes everything. The confidence that allowed aggressive tactics has been replaced by caution bordering on paralysis. Every engagement now carries risk we previously did not face. The autumn of 1944 saw this pattern repeated across the Western Front. German Panther crews, aware of American ammunition capabilities, adopted increasingly defensive tactics. They positioned vehicles in hull-down positions to minimize mantlet exposure. They avoided close-range engagements where HVAP was most effective. They relied heavily on ambush tactics rather than the aggressive maneuver warfare German doctrine emphasized. While tactically sound given the circumstances, this defensive mindset ceded initiative to American forces who could exploit mobility and combined arms superiority. The allocation of HVAP ammunition remained a source of frustration for American tank crews throughout the fall and winter of 1944. Despite increased production, supply never met demand. Tank destroyer battalions, whose mission focused specifically on anti-tank combat, received preferential allocation. Sherman tank battalions, with their dual role of supporting infantry and engaging enemy armor, often received fewer rounds despite encountering German tanks more frequently than specialized tank destroyer units. This created operational tensions between tactical needs and supply realities. Lieutenant Robert Hoffman of the 3rd Armored Division expressed common frustration in a letter home dated November 3, 1944. "We have 6 HVAP rounds per tank, 6 rounds to face an enemy that fields Panthers as standard equipment. We're told to use them only against heavy armor at optimal range. But what constitutes optimal range in combat? If we wait for perfect conditions, we may be destroyed before achieving them. If we fire at marginal ranges, we waste irreplaceable ammunition. This burden of decision, knowing that expending HVAP unwisely could cost crew lives later, weighs heavily on every commander. The shortage became critical during the German offensive in the Ardennes in December 1944. The Battle of the Bulge saw hundreds of Panthers and Tiger tanks deployed in winter conditions that favored defensive fighting and limited Allied air superiority due to poor weather. American Sherman crews relied heavily on their scarce HVAP ammunition to engage German heavy armor. Many units exhausted their HVAP supply within days and found resupply requests going unfulfilled as logistical networks struggled to deliver ammunition through snow-blocked roads disrupted by German advances. Staff Sergeant Donald, Critchfield's tank company, faced this exact situation during the defense of Bastogne. His after-action report detailed the ammunition crisis. By December 21st, we had expended all HVAP ammunition engaging German armor, attempting to overrun our positions. Requests for resupply went unanswered for 6 days. During that period, we engaged Panthers using only standard 76mm ammunition. Results were poor. We achieved kills only through side shots or by immobilizing tracks and calling in artillery on disabled vehicles. The psychological impact of losing our most effective ammunition was severe. Crews felt vulnerable in ways they hadn't since receiving HVAP in September. Yet, even in difficult fighting of the Ardennes, American forces demonstrated that tactical skill and combined arms coordination could compensate for technical disadvantage and ammunition shortages. Tank crews coordinated closely with infantry using bazooka teams to disable Panthers from close range, while Shermans provided covering fire. Artillery forward observers called in time on target missions that damaged optics, disabled tracks, and killed exposed crew members even when shells could not penetrate armor. Air support, when weather finally permitted in late December and January, proved devastatingly effective against German armor concentrated on approach roads. The Battle of the Bulge ended with German armoured forces shattered, having lost hundreds of irreplaceable tanks and experienced crews in an offensive that failed to reach its objectives. Among the destroyed German vehicles, American investigators found clear evidence of HVAP effectiveness. Panthers examined after the battle showed multiple penetrations through mantlets and turret faces. The small entry holes and extensive internal damage were distinctive signatures of tungsten carbide penetrators. By early 1945, the strategic situation had shifted decisively and irreversibly in Allied favor. American and British forces were preparing to cross the Rhine. Soviet armies were advancing from the east, having shattered German defensive lines in massive winter offensives. Germany's industrial capacity was collapsing under combined strategic bombing, loss of territory containing critical resources and manufacturing facilities, and severe shortages of raw materials including fuel and tungsten. Panther production, which had reached 3,900 units in 1944, fell sharply in early 1945 as factories were bombed, transportation networks disrupted, and raw materials became unavailable. Even when Panthers were produced, fuel shortages often kept them immobile. German tank units in the final months frequently abandoned tanks not because of combat damage, but because they had no fuel to operate them or spare parts to repair minor mechanical issues. The transformation of American tank crews from mid-1944 to early 1945 reflected the cumulative impact of combat experience, improved equipment availability, and familiarity with specialized ammunition, including HVAP, Crews that had landed in Normandy in June 1944 often felt genuinely apprehensive about facing German armour, particularly Panthers and Tigers. By early 1945, after months of sustained combat, significant training improvements, increased availability of 76mm Shermans, and growing familiarity with HVAP ammunition, American tankers approached engagements far more confidently. This psychological shift had direct tactical consequences. Confident crews fought more aggressively, took calculated risks when opportunities appeared, and exploited tactical advantages. They maneuvered for flanking shots rather than calling for support. They coordinated with infantry and artillery to create combined arms solutions to tactical problems. While HVAP ammunition alone did not create this transformation, its availability and proven effectiveness contributed meaningfully to improved morale and tactical performance throughout American armored forces. Lieutenant Marcus Stevenson, who had fought from Normandy to Germany, reflected on this transformation in a letter dated March 15, 1945. "We feared Panthers in June, we respected them in September. By March, we knew how to kill them." The 76mm gun and HVAP ammunition gave us tools that worked, but more importantly, we learned that German tanks could be defeated through tactics, coordination, and aggressive action. The ammunition provided capability, experience and confidence provided the will to use that capability effectively. The Korean War, beginning in June 1950, provided an unexpected final chapter in the 76mm Sherman's combat history. American M4. A 3/8 Shermans, the final production variant armed with 76mm guns, faced Soviet-built 3485s in North Korean and later Chinese service. Unlike the situation in Europe, where HVAP had been critically scarce, by 1950 tungsten supplies were no longer constrained and substantial stocks existed. American tank crews in Korea found that HVAP rounds easily penetrated 3485 armor at normal combat ranges. The Soviet tank, while effective, possessed armor protection significantly inferior to the Panther. Its 90mm thick turret front and 45mm thick glacis plate could not resist tungsten carbide projectiles fired at high velocity from 76mm guns. American Shermans in Korea achieved remarkably favorable exchange ratios against communist armor, due partly to superior crew training, but also significantly to plentiful HVAP ammunition availability. First Lieutenant Samuel Fowler, commanding a Sherman platoon in Korea in July 1950, recorded an engagement near the Naktong River. "We encountered 4 3485s at approximately 600 meters. All 4 were destroyed within 3 minutes using HVAP ammunition. Penetrations were achieved on first or second shots against each target." The effectiveness was almost shocking compared to what veterans had described from fighting Panthers in Europe. The difference was partly the weaker Soviet armor, but mostly that we had sufficient HVAP to engage aggressively without worrying about ammunition conservation. The vindication of the 76mm Sherman in Korea was bittersweet for European theatre veterans. The ammunition that had been so scarce in 1944 and 1945 proved devastatingly effective when supply constraints no longer limited employment. Many veterans reflected on how different European fighting might have been with Korean War levels of HVAP availability. Yet even with limited supplies, the ammunition had achieved its purpose, giving American tank crews a weapon that could defeat German heavy armor under favorable circumstances. The legacy of HVAP development continues influencing modern ammunition design. American armor doctrine from 1945 onward consistently emphasized ammunition effectiveness as a critical component of tank design. Modern tank ammunition uses depleted uranium or tungsten alloy penetrators, materials chosen for essentially the same density and hardness properties that made tungsten carbide effective in World War II. The underlying principle remains constant: concentrate maximum kinetic energy into a small, extremely dense projectile, moving at the highest achievable velocity. The Monet Abrams main battle tank, named for Colonel Creighton Abrams, who commanded at Aracourt, incorporates a 120mm smoothbore gun specifically designed to fire advanced kinetic energy penetrators. The M829 armor-piercing fin-stabilized discarding sabot round uses a depleted uranium penetrator that functions on the same principles as World War II HVAP, a dense, hard core achieving penetration through kinetic energy. The continuity from 1944 HVAP to present-day ammunition illustrates how foundational lessons from World War II continue directly influencing military technology. The German engineers who examined destroyed Panthers and recovered unexploded HVAP rounds in late 1944 recognized American achievements in ammunition development. Post-war interrogations revealed grudging professional respect combined with frustration at German inability to respond. Oberstleutnant Friedrich Koch, assigned to evaluate American ammunition technology, submitted a report in January 1945 that acknowledged American industrial superiority. The Americans have developed and produced tungsten core ammunition in quantities we cannot match. This represents not just technical achievement but industrial capacity we lack. Even if we develop equivalent ammunition, we cannot produce it in meaningful quantities given our limited tungsten access and disrupted manufacturing. Koch's report concluded with an assessment that transcended immediate tactical concerns. We have lost the ammunition technology race as decisively as we have lost the production quantity race. The Americans possess both adequate weapons and adequate ammunition in overwhelming numbers. This combination is strategically decisive, regardless of individual weapon system superiority we may achieve. The war's outcome will be determined by industrial capacity and resource availability, not by technical excellence in individual weapons design. The story of the 76mm Sherman and HVAP ammunition ultimately demonstrates a fundamental principle of modern warfare. Technical superiority in individual weapons matters and provides advantages, but operational excellence, superior logistics, better training, and adequate weapons produced in overwhelming quantities matter more for achieving strategic success. The Panther was objectively superior to the Sherman in armor protection and gun performance. German tank crews were often well-trained and tactically proficient, but American industrial capacity produced solutions to tactical problems faster than German industry could counter them. By war's end, approximately 50,000 Shermans of all variants had been produced compared to approximately 6,000 Panthers. This 8-to-1 production ratio, combined with ammunition improvements like HVAP that reduced the technical gap, proved strategically decisive. Even with limited HVAP availability, American armored forces achieved consistent tactical success through combined arms and coordination, superior logistics, overwhelming numbers, and ammunition that worked adequately when properly employed. The morning of October 7, 1944, when Karl Becker's Panther crew retreated from Overloon after encountering 76mm Sherman fire, represented more than a single tactical defeat. It symbolized the broader shift in armored warfare's psychological balance. German crews who had fought confidently behind thick armor learned that American industrial capacity could produce weapons and ammunition that posed credible threats. American crews who had felt outmatched gained confidence from knowing they possessed tools that could defeat Panthers under favorable circumstances. This transformation, enabled by tungsten carbide and velocity, influenced every subsequent armoured engagement of the European War. The crews who fired those first HVAP rounds in combat, watching tungsten cores punch through armour that had seemed invincible, demonstrated that industrial capacity and material science, applied intelligently to urgent tactical problems, could overcome seemingly insurmountable technical disadvantages. The lesson remains relevant for military planners today. Adequate weapons produced in sufficient quantity with effective ammunition will consistently defeat superior weapons available in limited numbers. Karl Becker survived the war and spent years reflecting on his combat experiences. In a 1968 interview, he spoke candidly about the psychological impact of that October morning near Overloon. "We believed our armor made us invulnerable from the front. That belief was crucial to our confidence and aggressive tactics. When the American shell penetrated our mantlet, that belief shattered. We never felt truly safe again. Every engagement carried risks we had not faced before." The Americans had developed a solution to our advantage, and that solution was available in sufficient quantity to change the tactical calculation. We were no longer hunters, we had become prey. The German tankers who laughed at Sherman capabilities in Normandy learned through bitter experience in autumn 1944 that American industrial might could transform tactical realities faster than German engineering could respond. The 76mm gun and HVAP ammunition didn't make Shermans equal to Panthers in technical specifications, but they made Sherman crews dangerous opponents who could achieve kills under favorable circumstances. In warfare, that shift from helpless to capable, from fearful to confident, proves as decisive as any technical specification. The tungsten cores that punched through Panther mantlets throughout late 1944 and early 1945 carried more than kinetic energy. They carried the proof that American industrial capacity could solve tactical problems decisively, and that proof helped win the war. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.